Alright, welcome back to Turd Towns, the channel that shines a light on the good and bad of places in England that you've never heard of. Who am I kidding? It's all been bad so far. We recently covered the 8 biggest turd towns in Somerset, and now it's time for another county. Now I know I promised Devon next, but to be honest, with the lack of daylight in the Devonshire winter, it gets dark at 4 PM and everything is so spaced out in Devon it makes a day's filming impossible. So instead, we visited Gloucestershire. Gloucestershire is a large county bordering the country of Wales to the west, Wiltshire to the east, Bristol to the south, and Worcestershire to the north. It also partially contains the Cotswolds and the Forests of Dean, which you've probably heard of. Gloucester is a big county which is divided by the River Severn, and both halves of the county feel distinctively different. Now, all of today's choices for the worst place to live in Gloucestershire are based on factual research and also our personal opinions when we visited, so there's no complaining. We did our research. Now, the issue with Gloucestershire is that there aren't really that many bad places. It's a pretty idyllic county to live and vacation in. It's posh. But after spending the whole day here, we did manage to scrape together 6 places worthy of being called a turd town, and stay tuned for number 1, it may surprise you. Let's get into it. Number 6, Newent. Let me just start by saying it is not horrible in Newent like the later entries, but we've included it for a reason. We always have our reasons. This small town with a population of 6,777 is located right at the top of Gloucestershire on the northern edge of the Forest of Dean, but it sure doesn't feel picturesque or nice like the forest does. This place feels more like Night of the Living Dead, and everything in this town looks old and in need of a lick of paint. Some of these shops look like they haven't had a refit since opening in the 60s, or cleaned their windows. It's not much to ask, is it? Newent has a reputation for being a place to move to when you're ready to die, and we can see why. An entire quarter of the entire population of this town is over the age of 65, and the average in England is just 17.7. But I have some good news for you. Because most of the town is so elderly, you're going to be pretty safe here. There was only a total of 35 crimes here in the whole of 2022, but I felt like I aged 1,000 years just walking down the high street here. Then I realised how I'd driven so far into the middle of nowhere for this. A co-op. Now, we do have to give credit where credit's due. There's a pretty nice lake right near the town centre, which has been given the very imaginative name of Newent Lake. If you want to live here, the average house price is $276,000 compared to the incredibly high Gloucestershire average of $365,000. So in comparison, it's cheap in Newent. But it doesn't feel posh here. It just feels like a place that's dying and it might collapse any second. There's nothing to do here, it's isolated, you will spend all your wages on paint. But hey, at least it's got a lake. If you live here, the main thing to do seems to be going to church on Sunday, with over 67% of the population describing themselves as Christians. This is so far higher than the average of Christians in England, which is less than 50%. I guess the old people have to have something to do. Number 5, Kingswood. Now, some might class this one as cheating, but we say screw that. Jumping over the river from our last entry, Kingswood is located in South Gloucestershire. It's actually attached to the city of Bristol, 3.5 miles away from the city centre. Which means some people may complain about this entry, but this is officially in South Gloucestershire County, so too bad. This area has a population of around 9,000, and because it's attached to the city of Bristol, the demographics are quite different to most of today's entries on this list. Kingswood is 89.2% white compared to the Gloucestershire average of 95%. By the time we visited Kingswood, it was dark, and this meant we met some interesting locals whilst filming. One of the locals was also caught doing something he shouldn't be in his bedroom, but I don't know, maybe this is supposed to be some kind of sick tourist attraction in Kingswood. It certainly drew a crowd of happy locals on the pavement. Speaking of the locals, they're mostly young in Kingswood, with only 16% of the population over the age of 65. Housing is expensive here because it's joint to the expensive city of Bristol, with the average house sitting at 282 grand in Kingswood, which is one of the most expensive on this list. So Kingswood is just a Bristol suburb. What's the big deal? Well, the place is riddled with crime and has a bad reputation amongst Bristolians. But you see, the councillors here are smart because no individual crime rate has been provided for Kingswood. But it must be high because almost weekly something seems to be happening up there. We bet it probably finishes the highest on this list, but without the facts to back it up, I'm not going to say that. Just 2 weeks ago, a cannabis factory was found. A woman was seriously assaulted in a park, and a masked man broke into a rugby club, all in the space of a few weeks. An average night out in Kingswood is spent in Chaser's nightclub in a building that looks like a nuclear bomb shelter next to a card shop. The most exciting thing about this place is the fight you're bound to get in when the locals find out that you aren't approving of dating your sister. There's just much better places to live in Bristol, or South Gloucestershire for that matter. Number 4, Stroud. Coming in at number 4 is Stroud, which is a small-sized town about 10 miles south of Gloucester City. And it's at the foot of the Cotswold Hills. Apparently my American viewers have real struggle pronouncing the name of this place. It's Stroud. It rhymes with loud or proud, which the locals of this place are certainly not. It's not Stroud. I don't mean to be rude. Stroud is an example of a place that looks pretty nice on the surface, but the facts don't lie and it makes the list today due to some bad facts. Stroud has a population of 13,500 and the people here must be pretty bored. Stroud is ranked as the worst small town in Gloucestershire when it comes to crime, with a crime rate of 99 in 1,000 people. In fact, it has the worst crime rate out of anywhere on today's list. This compares poorly to the Gloucestershire average of 52 in 1,000. The most common crimes in Stroud are antisocial crimes, but it also places high for criminal damage and arson. Stroud does admittedly have some things going for it. It's picturesque enough. The main shopping area is pretty cool. Wind your way through maze-like old buildings made out of Cotswold stone and discover some independent shops. It certainly has atmosphere here. And it is right on the doorstep of the Cotswolds, so it would make a good base for a holiday. So it looks pretty nice. It's also conveniently located between the cities of Bristol and Gloucester, so I guess it's handy for commuting. It also has its own train station. But overall, it's a no from us because Stroud is just so damn hilly and we can't ignore the crime rate. And because of the crime rate, you'd expect cheap houses, but somehow it's the most expensive place on this list, with the average house sitting at $351,000. That's a lot to live in the most crime-filled place in Gloucestershire. We would have listed Stroud as worse on this list, but last year the Sunday Times ranked this as the best place to live in England, despite its high crime rate. Sexual offences got so bad in Stroud that a group of hundreds of women marched through the town to highlight the problems. Very conflicting data for Stroud. So we'd say it's a place that's nice on the surface, but like a prepubescent spot, you have to scratch a bit deeper to make all the pus come out. Number 3, Cinderford. Visiting Cinderford was interesting. Jumping back over the River Severn, Cinderford is the nearest on our list to the Forest of Dean, so that must mean that it's nice then. Wrong. Cinderford is described as a historic market town with a population of 8,777, and we must have visited in the worst possible weather. But I think it perfectly demonstrates what Cinderford looks like on an average day. Depressing and grey. The buildings all look battered and old, but not a good old. Old like they're begging to be put out their misery old. Cinderford is a former mining town that died on its ass in the 60s when all the mines closed down and lots of the men moved away. But that's no excuse for it to still look so run down and terrible 60 years later. Everything seems to be centred around this giant bus stop canopy thing, which I believe is meant to be the market area. You'd be lucky to fit 6 stalls in here, and I bet they're all shit. All the shops look bad. There's not even any chain shops you'd want to visit. The main shop in the town seems to be the factory shop, and nobody even likes that. Okay, I'm lying, because if we head a bit further out, there is a Tesco where we spent most of our visit trying to psych ourselves up to walk around this hellhole. And whilst we're on the subject of walking, you'll be doing a lot of walking if you live here. The whole place seems to be one giant mountain with some disgusting houses plastered to the side. And you can buy one of those houses for an average of $232,000, which is one of the cheapest on today's list. Cinderford has its own cinema, possibly the smallest one I've ever seen. It was built in 1910, so that's something. The praise ends there because I'm afraid this place has a bad crime rate of 62 in 1,000, which doesn't sound that bad until you realise it's almost the same as Cheltenham, a place that is 10 times bigger than Cinderford. It does have a plus point though. If you head up to the top of Cinderford, it looks out across the River Severn, and the Cinderford residents could one day dream of swimming across and escaping to the better part of Gloucestershire. Number 2, Gloucester. Yeah, it's the capital of Gloucestershire. The county town. Actually, it's a city with a population of 132,000, making this, I believe, the first city we've ever covered on this channel. And it's a dump. Unfortunately, it's near to the similar sized place of Cheltenham, which has a far better reputation, and therefore Gloucester has made the butt of all jokes from the locals. It's really like a poor big brother. The town centre looks a bit depressed. It could be nice here, there's definitely potential, but there's a few hurdles. First, you would need to have some good shops in the first place. Second, you'd have to hurdle over the growing homeless population of Gloucester, with around 1 in 433 people homeless in this city. The third problem is that the city centre has been pretty much made irrelevant. In 2009, a large shopping outlet called Gloucester Quays opened a 10-minute walk away from the city centre. It's pretty good there, but it's left the giant eyesore of what's supposed to be the centre. Who knows what will happen to this area now? Well, I can answer that. Gloucester has been given $50 million to improve its centre, but the derelict buildings are just being turned into parts of the university. It feels like a lot of city centres are going this way. Gloucester has the third highest crime rate on this list at 87 in 100. Again, Cheltenham is safer at 72 in 100. Yet another reason Cheltenham is better. Just like Kingswood earlier on, only 16% of the population is over 65, making it the joint youngest place on this list. But a lot of them seem to be struggling, with the average house coming in at 269,000. And at the end of the day, with some of the most depressing looking housing estates in the entire county, why would you bother paying that? Number 1. Mitcheldean. Leaping back over the River Severn once again, it's Mitcheldean. Yes, the very small town with a population of 2,776. It's not only the smallest place on the list, but it's the shittest too. Located in the middle of Cinderford and Newent, not far from the Forest of Dean. You've probably never heard of Mitcheldean, and there's a good reason for that. It's a low-key kind of dump. It's so small that it usually goes under the radar for this sort of thing. Do a search on the internet, you won't find much. We weren't planning on even including Mitcheldean until we drove through it by accident, and we were appalled by what we saw. First of all, it feels extremely Welsh here, with big hills all around it and what looks like old industry buildings. That's not a knock on Wales, it's merely an observation. Everything is in a state of decay in Mitcheldean. Empty, rotting buildings barely able to stand up resemble something out of Detroit City, or perhaps Chernobyl. Also featured in Mitcheldean is the ugliest collection of houses I think I've ever seen. Can't the council do something about this, perhaps some replastering? These look like they would be a health hazard to live in. But I guess when houses are only running at an average of 265 here, nah, I'm not doing it. It's still a massive rip-off to live in this dump. There's something that resembles a high street here. We saw one shop, one takeaway, a library and a dilapidated town hall. Nothing else was here. Oh wait, I'm forgetting about the world's most random barbers. Look at it, it doesn't belong there. They have tried to create a pretty garden here, but I'm sure the sun never shines in Mitcheldean and it died, just like the rest of the town. Yes, there are some nice estates around the outskirts of Mitcheldean, but that's like saying the dump you took last night was better than the one you took today. Due to the small size of the place, there isn't that much data around regarding crime, but we would hazard a guess that vandalism and arson are high on the list due to the state of the buildings in the town. So whilst there isn't much data for this place, it's so jarring, run down and ugly. And to top all of that, it's in the asshole of nowhere, so it just had to make our list as number 1. We felt genuinely depressed here and couldn't wait to leave. So that's the 6 worst places in Gloucestershire. Did you agree with our choices? Do you live in any of the places mentioned today? What's it like living in them? And don't forget to like and subscribe and help Turd Towns thrive.